Hello, everyone. I'm Hardik from Learn Web 3, third workshop for day two of the Decentralized Intelligence Hackathon Season 2. Um, Highly awaited workshop today. We have Rish from Aigner. We're talking about building on Farcaster. So I'll pop in here and there. We'll see how it goes. I know a few people have been waiting for this. Frames are hyped up right now. So excited for this. Welcome, Rish. Great to have you here. Won't take up too much of your time. Let's just take it away.
Yeah, sweet. Thanks, Hardik. Appreciate you having us here. And today I can walk you guys through what we do for Farcaster on the Nanar side. Feel free to ask questions, throw them in the chat, or just like unmute and say it out loud. And then I'll also pause in the end for questions. Um, so let's get started. We'll start with the very beginning. So this is nanar.com. All of you should be able to go here and see what we offer. And we'll start with some of where we started essentially, which is like hubs and the very basics are with hubs and APIs that allow you to build both like clients as well as frames. So this is our documentation site. You can go here from docs, and this will walk you through what we offer. We have a bunch of guides that you can use to like get started, all the way from like writing data to Farcaster, fetching casts, fetching frames, building frames, and it has like detailed step-by-step things that you can go do. In terms of the API itself, there's an API reference here that takes you through the different APIs we offer. So for example, for the frame APIs, if you are building a frame on Farcaster and want to like validate, okay, I see a quick TLDR on Farcaster. Let me just wrap up what I was saying and I'll do a quick TLDR on Farcaster. Um, if you're building a frame on Farcaster, assuming you're already familiar with Farcaster, thanks for bringing that up. This is an example of how you can use our APIs, and you can try the APIs directly on the docs page and see responses, see if this fits what you're looking for. And then this will give you the kind of code request you need to make in different languages that you can then install in your code base. So pretty simple to get started. Let me pause there and quickly address the question here, which is what is Farcaster? Great point. So Farcaster is a decentralized social network, somewhat similar to Lens. I think the architectures differ a little bit, where Lens started fully on chain, previously on Polygon, and since then they have moved into their own layers of Momoka, and I think they have built a layer 3 on top of that. Farcaster was sufficiently on chain, not fully on chain, so the identity layer and the storage is bought on chain. Every user has an identity on Optimism. That's what gives them their Farcaster ID or FID. And all the content they create or the interactions they have with other people live in this other off-chain network called the Farcaster hubs, where every hub is essentially a node. But because it's not a blockchain, it's not exactly the same as a node. Nodes have a very specific definition of time, which is what allows you to know which block came after which block or before which other block. And computing that time and kind of aligning the nodes in the right ordering is also what costs the gas. In case of Farcaster, they have a much more vague notion of time. So you can't always prove that a cast came before another cast. Somebody can theoretically publish a cast with a different time than what the time is right now. But because Dan and Varun took this bet that, hey, for social media data, it doesn't actually matter that whole lot that the ordering is always accurate, they were able to do this off chain in a way that scales much better and doesn't cost gas to interact on the network. The reason they took this bet, no, that's not true for Farcaster not being decentralized. So there's a question in the chat about Farcaster not being decentralized and trust the nodes of Farcaster. I'll address that in a second, but Farcaster is fully decentralized. To finish up my previous point, the reason blockchains are arranged in a certain manner is because you have to know the exact financial record at any given point in time to know who owes what balance. And that record can't be in any different order, else you'll have the wrong balances for people. That is not true for social networks. So it doesn't matter whether you said GM in a cast first versus somebody else, and if there was a difference of a few seconds, because there's no money being moved around. And thus you can do this in a slightly different way. And so now to coming to the point of like, is Farcaster decentralized or not? It is actually fully decentralized because similar to a blockchain node, like anybody can run an Ethereum node, anybody can run a Farcaster hub. And there's hundreds of hubs running today. Like our hubs at any given point in time connect to over 300 other hubs that are being run around the world. And anybody running a hub has full access to Farcaster data, and they can both read data from the network as well as publish data to the network. And it has no dependencies on anybody else. So the only difference here being is that it's not architected very similar to a blockchain because, again, it doesn't cost gas. But it is a distributed system, and anybody can run a node in the system, and that's what makes the system decentralized. A decentralization doesn't actually come from whether you pay gas or not. It just comes from whether the system is distributed enough where enough people are running whatever is the equivalent of a node on that system. So Farcaster is fully decentralized. What we offer with our services here is similar to what you get, let's say from Alchemy. You can get a gRPC node endpoint for Ethereum. In this case, you can get a node endpoint for Farcaster without having to spin up your own node every time. And that node endpoint in this case is called a hub endpoint. I'll walk you guys through how to get that. But that gives you read and write access to the entire data on the network. What we have here on the screen right now are APIs that we have built on top of the node architecture, because the nodes have raw data, and that's kind of hard to read and write from, and you have to do a lot of transformations in order to make it better suited for the application layer. And what these APIs do is that they massage the data in a shape that your application or your frame would expect, and now it's much easier to work with. And so you can go through these APIs and like get different kinds of network information. You can also post back to the network, so you can like publish a cast to the network and it'll go out without you having to worry about how to transform the cast into something that the network accepts, because the network doesn't accept, like if you look at what Farcaster looks like, so this is on Warpcast, the network doesn't take in casts in the same format that you see here. You have to like transform it in a way that the hub will accept it. While if you use our API services, you can just give us the cast, and we will transform it for you, we will write it for you, and you don't have to worry about all of that. One thing to note here, speaking of decentralization and how to write to the network and so on, writing to the network requires something that's called a signer. A signer is essentially similar to like what you would think of a OAuth permission in Web 2, where you can give permissions to a certain app that writes on your behalf. You have to do the same thing with Farcaster, where Warpcast has a signer for you and can write to the network on your behalf. And similarly, if you build another Farcaster app, it'll need that permission. Those permissions are also stored on chain. So they're stored on Optimism Network. It requires about 10 cents today after the 4844 upgrade to create a signer on the network. And that's what gives your app permission to write on behalf of the user. And storing these signers requires similar security practices as storing like Web 2 OAuth, where you want to store them in secure storage. You don't want to like transport them. You don't want to lose them somewhere, because somebody with a leaked signer can now write on behalf of that user, and that's obviously bad. So what we do for users here is that we, for our developers, we abstract all of this away. So we handle all the signer management, and you don't need to worry about storing them or getting them or all of that. You can just integrate our auth product, which we call Sign In with Aigner, and it's like drag and drop. You can just like post this code. This is for web. There's like a React Native version of this. And you can just like embed this, and we will handle the whole sign-in for the user, do the signer management, and you can then just like start using our publish APIs to like write cast to the network without necessarily having to worry about how to do all of this on your end. So let me pause there for a second. Yeah, good question here. Doesn't it become possible to spam the network by just posting a lot of casts if there is no gas? Yes, that is possible. So if you are a bad actor, you can just post a lot of messages to the network, and you have now like become a spammy user. But the outcome here is that there's no real issue because the client or even the API layer at this point, we know what is a good user versus a bad user. So if you go to like Warpcast, for example, Warpcast pretty much filters out all bad users. So when you look at somebody's likes or replies, bad users just don't show up. Similarly, in our, like, we don't do this across every API. We just have one API where we do this, where we have a trending feed API. Where is this? Retrieve trending casts. And you can, like, give it a time window and say, hey, I want the trending casts from, let's say, the last hour. And essentially what this will do is it'll give you the trending casts, but filter out all the bad casts. So there's like a bunch of like airdrop farmers that'll come in and say, hey, here's a random airdrop you should claim, or here's a random NFT you should claim. And they are just bogus claims. Like there's no airdrop. They're trying to like scam you into something. And this filters that out fully. And there are various heuristics you can use to do this, but spamming the network doesn't have a cost in terms of like how you use the rest of the network. There is a sign up cost to use the network. So if you're a new user, Warpcast today, if you sign up through Warpcast and you're in a specific set of countries, Warpcast will subsidize your sign up cost and you'll sign up for free. But if you are in the rest of the world or you aren't signing up through Warpcast, creating an account on Farcaster costs about $4 to $5 to get your FID and the storage. And that initial onboarding cost already keeps away most bad actors because they don't want to spend the money in order to then start posting to the network. We'll see how that cost scales. Like it goes up and down depending on how good or bad the signups are. So if there's a period of like extremely bad signups, you can expect that cost rises from like $3 to like $7 or $8. And the cost is also fully decentralized. So for example, we have APIs where you can onboard users to the network without relying on Warpcast at all. And you can just create a new user and they will be registered on the network. We will make the storage for them. And then you have onboarded a new user to the network where you have their signers, their write access, and you can now write on behalf of them from your app. So all of this is still decentralized. It's kind of a built-in spam prevention mechanism. Yeah, let me pause there. Any questions on this? Was a lot of information on like APIs and hubs. Any questions on this before we move on to other things? TLDR for frames. So frames, I think the best way to think about frames is that if you remember widgets from back in the day, they still exist on some Web 2 platforms. At the simplest level, it is very similar to a widget where you can now put in something arbitrary on a different page. And what that thing is depends on how you build it. They're pretty limited today. So if you think about frames specifically, you can kind of separate the rendering from the compute. And what I mean by that is the rendering of a frame is only images right now. So you can render a JPEG, a PNG, or GIF, and that's on the rendering side. But there's a compute side in the backend where you can do any arbitrary computation. And as long as you can render that compute in an image, that frame will work. Yeah, I think GIFs were always there in frames. So you should be able to do that today. So the compute on the back end, that the fact that it can be arbitrary can result in a lot of like cool frames where people, obviously there was this meta around like recast to mint or like to mint or follow to mint and all of that. People started building games. So there's a bunch of like cool frame games now where the rendering of the game is still like an image. But you can do different things, and like I think like Cassie launched like a full Doom game in a frame where you can like walk around and actually play it. And that obviously gets pretty complex, and performance is bad, and all of that. But it goes to show that the compute on the back end can really be arbitrary, and you can do like insane kind of things on the back as long as you can push it to the front end in some sort of an image. I think the rendering will improve from just images to other things over time. But that's where we are right now. The way this works is that all the images are essentially meta tags inside a web page. So you can build up an arbitrary web page, and the web page doesn't even need to show anything on the DOM. But just inside the head, there's a bunch of meta tags, and the meta tags have all these images that you want to render, or the buttons that you want to render. And the frame server will host this. We provide a frame server on Aigner if you want to do this, or you can use something like Vercel. And as long as you embed the link to the frame server on Warpcast, Warpcast will read the meta tags and render them. And that's what happens here. And so these are all like different frame servers that you can see here. And Warpcast just reads the meta tags and renders them here. And it's a pretty nice concept in the sense that you're not really dependent on any specific client. All clients read them the same way. So, for example, Supercast, they also render frames. Like this is a mint frame here. And Supercast uses Aigner in the background, so we help them render it. We help you take actions on them, help you validate, and all of this can be done by anybody in the ecosystem. So it's again not Warpcast dependent. And I think frames over time will grow to like more complex things. Right now, it's a pretty simple system, but it also, because of its simplicity, allows users to get started quickly. Let's see. I can quickly walk through some of the frame stuff here. So I briefly talked about the validation. An interesting thing about frames is, unlike widgets, every action on a frame is signed by the user's custody address, which means you can now prove which client, which user actually interacted with the frame. And what this means is, let's say you launch a frame that goes really viral. There's going to be a lot of bot users that are going to try and click the buttons on your frame. And this happens a lot. We see this on our frames today. But there's a way to separate good users from bad users. And so what you can do in this case is whenever there's an action on a frame, what you get back is some message bytes in hex format. And that's because of the signature that the custody address generates on the frame action. And you can pass that message byte inside this validation API, and you get back a bunch of data about what just happened on that action. And it'll tell you who interacted. So if they are a real user, they'll have an FID. You'll know who they are on the network. You'll know what button they tapped, what cast they interacted with, like where was this frame shared, and what are the details of that cast. So for example, if you're following that meta of hey, I want the user to only move on to the next page of this frame if they liked or recasted the cast, all of that information is available here. You just need to pass in the right flags to get that information. Same for does the user who interacted with the frame that we call an interactor, did the interactor follow the cast author, for example? And you can pass in the follow context flag and we'll fill in that information. One thing we added recently with transaction frames is the signer context. And what that does is because there are transactions now, you want to make sure that this is a safe frame transaction. And so what we noticed is that bot developers or bot farmers would spin up random clients and try to hit your frame to farm mint transactions, for example. And now we have this transaction context thing where if you pass this in, we tell you which client the action originated from. And you can be oh, this client is not Warpcast, so I'm not going to authorize or allow this transaction on my frame server. And all of this stuff allows you to build a better frame. Now, if you were to do all of this without this API, and you can theoretically do this natively against a hub, you'd have to make a separate API call for all of these. So 4 to 5 API calls to get the same level of data. But in this case, you can just make one API call and you can pass in all these flags and you get all of this data hydrated at once. That just makes your frame faster, allows you to write less code and so on. That's one thing for frames. If you are an app like Supercast and you actually want to host frames on your surface, then you can let users interact with that frame. And there's this action API that takes in a user action and will interact with the frame on your client. And then finally, there's this other thing where we have a very simple frame format where for every slide, we call it a page within a frame as you progress through the pages. and you can create a new frame by just passing us what each page is. And you can do this in a JSON object and just ping us this JSON object on this create frame API. And we will host everything. We will render everything. And just with one API call, what you'll get back is a frame URL. And now you can programmatically create frames in your app. Like you can have a user come in and create a frame, or you can create a frame for them that they can share without having to like wrestle around with the front end on Vercel or even the back end and hosting your frame server, figuring out caching and all of that. Just like ping this API with the JSON object, that should be your frame, and we'll give you back the frame URL for that frame, and you can do what you want with it. And so that kind of makes programmatic frame building much easier, and is something that we are excited to like elaborate on in the future. So let me pause there again. With transaction frames, can we execute transactions on Optimism or any network? You can execute transactions on any EVM network. So Optimism, Base, Ethereum. I don't think they support transaction frames for Solana yet. I don't know if that's even planned. But any EVM network. So Solana support got added. It wasn't for transaction frames. It was to link your Solana address. I imagine what this means is in the future, they will support Solana transactions, but I don't think Solana frames are supported at the moment. As somebody, if you think this is wrong and they do support transaction frames on Solana, please correct me, but that's my current understanding. Okay. We'll quickly move on to some other things. Can we theoretically build the DEX on Frame? Sorry, addressing this last one question before moving on. Yes, you can theoretically build a DEX on a frame. I think as long as you figure out how to render the DEX in the image format and then let users interact with the full DEX engine with 4 buttons on every image, you can theoretically do it. It's a little hard, I guess, because DEXs ideally show live data, and the frame image is obviously static, even if it's a GIF, because it's looping. It's much easier to build things like betting platforms, like Polymarket or something, where you can show the bet up front in a static image, and if the user says enter and see data, then you feed them live data and render it on the fly. But DEXs are also doable. You just have to think about how to render it in a way that the user experience is useful. Okay, cool. Moving on to some of the other things we have here that might be useful. So anytime you sign up for an Aigner account, you have access to this portal, which we call the Aigner Dev portal. It'll show you like your API keys, how to access the hub, all of that. It'll also show you ways to like create a bot very simply. So for example, if you're building a bot, you can come in here. There's like a simple guide on how to create a Farcaster bot, and that just like walks you through creating a signer and doing all of that. And you can do that from our app here. And one final thing that I'll touch on here is we have webhooks. So anytime you are actually building a client or even a frame in some cases, instead of polling the network for the data or polling our APIs for the data, you can just set up a webhook, and the webhook will deliver the data in an event payload to your backend API. So you can just like put in your backend API here, and you can like create a webhook for like whenever a user data is updated or a cast is created or something. And that way you don't have to keep polling, you just get real-time updates to your backend. You can also create webhooks programmatically. So for example, if you go here, there's a set of like webhook APIs. So if you're building a client, for example, Supercast or even Warpcast, and your user wants to go into let's say an account, and let me actually pick an account I follow. Goes into an account, and let's say like you want to set up like notifications for that account, so anytime they cast out, you want to be notified, and you want your app to do this for your users, you can use these programmatic webhook APIs and create webhooks on the fly that will then deliver data to your backend. So if you guys are familiar with this product called AutoMod, this is an automated moderation tool for channels. And they run on our webhooks, where anytime you can now create a moderation bot, and the bot generates webhooks on our APIs and uses those webhooks to moderate casts inside channels. So that's a little bit about webhooks. You can also set them up manually in your dev portal if you're not going to do them programmatically, and maybe you just have one bot and you want to listen to any time the bot is mentioned. You can just like set them up here, but both approaches exist. So let me look at some questions before I move on to other things. Where's the data stored? I don't know what this is referencing. So whoever wrote this question, if you want to add a little explanation about what data you're talking about, I can answer that better. Somebody asked, I see this is paid. Is there a public RPC or testnet type thing we can use for development? It depends on what you're looking to develop. And if you're looking to develop a frame, so for example, you can use toolkits like Frog or OnChainKit, and all these toolkits come with like starter codes from us. So Frog, for example, Frog is a frame building SDK for people who are not familiar. And Frog comes in with a built-in middleware for Aigner. There's some community-built middlewares that other people can go add, and there's some built-in middlewares that Frog allows by default. And so Aigner is one of the built-in middlewares, and they have a demo API key. So for example, this is called Aigner Frog FM, and you can use this API key to like build a frame with Frog. Obviously, these API keys are rate limited. And then if you get rate limited, we expect you to like get your own API key to like get over those rate limits. The same thing works for OnChainKit or Frame.js or any of these other frame building tools. If you're building a client that requires using any of these APIs, then you can try them on this portal without an API key to see whether this works for you or not. But to actually use it in your application, you'll have to sign up for an Aigner account. So going back to this, look at the getting started. So we need to get starter. Yeah, depending on what you're looking to do, starter might be the plan to go. The previous question, I mean, where are the messages, images, and other data stored on Farcaster? Yeah, they are stored on the network hubs, like I was saying when I started this session. So if you are running a hub, you have access to all the data. If you're using us, you have access to a hub endpoint that also has all the data. Cool. Any other questions on webhooks or how to use any of these? Okay, sweet. We'll keep moving. There's a couple other smaller things we provide. I'm not sure how useful for people trying to build clients, but this is more useful if you're trying to do like data analysis and stuff. So we have this like SQL Playground product on some of our tiers. This one. And this allows you to query live data from the protocol without having to run your own indexer and your own database. So this is just a hosted database, and you get access to that, and you say like, let's say select star from cast where FID equals 194. This is my FID. And let's say you do something like this. So this shows my last 10 casts. And you now just have this on this hosted SQL Playground that you can now go query. And you can download the data if you want in a CSV file, if you're using that for data analysis. People have even built dashboards. So you can like build dashboards and externalize them. So this, for example, is a dashboard built by one of our users. And they publish this dashboard. You can go and see this on your side. And people build like interesting charts and graphs out of Farcaster data. So that's another thing that's useful here. You can even use the SQL Playground over API. So if you're querying for specific data that's not available in our APIs, but you want to do that programmatically, there's an API to do this. And you can then have your product query our SQL Playground with a query and get the data back and render it on your side. Yeah, I guess there was exactly that question in the chat. So yes, you can do that. Yeah, let me quickly pause there again. Any other questions? what are people looking to build? Depending on what you guys are looking to build, maybe I can dive deeper into some of those other sections. Any inspirations or ideas of what to build? So if you want to build frames, I think there's a lot of like cool frames to take inspiration from. So let me try to see if I can pull some up. Um, I made a short list of these like not that long ago. So I'll just quickly show you guys frames I found cool. Oh, actually, before I do that, let me actually show you one more thing. Less relevant if you're like hacking on a hackathon. Do have this thing called the Frame Studio where you can build frames without writing code. So you can just like start with a template or build a frame from scratch, and you can come in and like just build frame pages, add buttons, and you'll get back a frame URL in the end that you can just cast out. So people have built like a bunch of cool stuff using just this like Frame Studio without ever having to write any code at all. There's stuff like that you can do. So for example, a simple frame people built using just the Frame Studio. So this is People Pleaser, who is an artist in the NFT space, and she like built this game, which is a lava game, and it's built fully using our no-code Frame Studio. And you can do stuff like that without having to write code at all. I think Sean built a pretty nice game back in the day. This one. This is obviously had to write code for it. This is a pretty sophisticated frame. But you can go in here and just go to his profile, I guess, Sean Gang. For some reason, this isn't loading. Oh, there we go. This is a full game in a frame. I kind of find gaming frames pretty cool if the game is well built out and you have a lot of possibilities on like what kind of game to build. So I actually ended up playing this game for like a good 20 minutes. And I thought that was pretty fun. Um, some people have built betting frames. I think Bracket.game just launched with a frame where you can bet on March Madness. People have built tipping frames. Obviously, there's the usual NFT mint frame. Let's see. I wanted to try and do a wrapper around Uniswap in the frame, but I'll also, look into Uniswap and Polymarket. There's a bunch of cool stuff you can do with frames. For people looking to build clients, I actually put out this blog post last year, so it's been like a good 6 months since I put it out, on what you can build on Farcaster. And back then, frames were not around, so this doesn't have frame ideas, but there are a bunch of ideas for like what you can do with clients, what you can do with even analytics, because there's a bunch of stuff that just analytics will get you a set of customers that are currently not served in the market. What you can do for developers, like we are building developer tooling, but we can't build everything. So there are actually ways to even improve the developer tooling in the ecosystem, and we'd love to use something like these, especially number 8 here, if that existed, in a well enough shape. And there's just like some fun ideas at the bottom. I'll throw this link in the chat here for people who want to take a look. If you guys come up with other ideas, happy to add that to this list as well. But for non-frame, like people who are interested in not a frame, there's some ideas here. Some alpha for the hackathon. I don't know what alpha I can give you on Naynar specifically. We are pretty transparent with what we are building, so you can probably look at our roadmap on the Naynar Warpcast channel, where people keep asking for different feature requests, and we try to fulfill them as quickly as possible. We have some webhook stuff launching this week, where you'll be able to filter for webhooks that filter for casts that match a certain text or substring using webhooks. So any cast, for example, that mentions Warpcast, you can set up a webhook with just that text filter and it'll deliver it to your backend. There's some other features coming on our Frame Studio, but that's more on the no-code side, which I imagine is less useful for this crowd. All right, Hardik, we are also coming to like closer to end of the program here. How do you want to handle the last few minutes? What do you think about on-chain reputation products? I think on-chain reputation is a very interesting topic. I don't know how many of you are familiar with like Bounty Caster, for example. It'll become clearer in a second why I'm referencing this product in particular. But Bounty Caster allows you to post bounties on the network that other people can fulfill and give out a reward or bounty for fulfilling that task. And the reason I bring up this product is because this is a great example of using built-in social media reputation. Like they didn't have to spend time on an escrow protocol or figuring out how to give like a credit score style of reputation to every account, all because social reputation was built in and they could just rely on it. They could just say, hey, if somebody posted a bounty or if somebody said they completed a bounty, because they have a profile on Farcaster, other people will hold them accountable. And if they fail, we'll know that's a bad Farcaster account and there will be repercussions to their reputation. So even without a specific quantitative reputation score, they were able to build on top of the qualitative reputation that exists in a network. And that is just a shortcut to like now use social reputation to build other things. And Bountycaster is a great example of that. I think Karma Labs has been doing some like quantitative social reputation. I'm not super familiar with where they are exactly at this time. But I think they have been trying to do things like EAS attestation, for example, where you can attest somebody is good at something or they did something, and it'll get it. I think it might be this. It'll get attested on the EAS protocol, and that gets computed into your reputation score. Folks building with Karma will have to look into this to see exactly how it works. But yeah, I know they're doing more like quantitative reputation stuff. Hardik, I saw you come off mute. Sorry, I jumped into this question on the chat, but yeah, feel free to take over.
Um, yeah, if there's any other questions, we only have about like 5 minutes left, so perfect timing. If there's any last minute questions anybody has, we can quickly take them. Otherwise, we'll just start wrapping up. I was going to say thank you, Rich. This was very engaging, lots of information. We learned a lot. I'm sure people got some ideas as well. So love to see what everybody's building out here. And yeah, you know me, I'm like people who've been here, like some of the names over here. Also, I'm sorry if you hear dogs barking in the background right now. I'm in India right now, and it's just what it is. But um, you know, people who've been here before with us. You know, I'm a huge Farcaster shill, huge Ninar shill as well. So this is what it is. I'm super excited actually to see like what people specifically do the Farcaster bounty. So yeah, just
Absolutely.
for all this.
Happy to help. Thanks for having me. If anybody has questions, there's a Nanar channel on Farcaster. I'll drop this in here as well. Just post your question there, and we will try to address as they come up. But yeah, otherwise, it was great to do this session. So thank you.
Amazing. Thank you so much. And thank you, everybody, for coming as well. For those of you who joined late, it is recorded. It will be up on YouTube in like 1 or 2 hours max. So you can go back and watch it over there. If at any point you have questions, further questions, you can reach us in the Discord. You can reach out on the NNR channel, on Farcaster, anywhere else. We'll try to help you out as much as we can. But with that, thank you, everyone. Have a great rest of your day, rest of your night, wherever you are, and we shall see each other shortly.